Everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you about the modes of communication. I already spoke to you a little bit about just introduction to communication and business communication in general. Today I want to talk to you about the modes of written, oral, and visual communication, just so you can get an idea of the differences between them and what context they might be used, and strategies that you want to think about when you're using them. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about message in general. All modes of communication are going to have a message, and they may be communicating them in different ways, but they have something that they want to share with another human being or group of human beings or some other entity. So any given message is going to have a primary message, secondary message, and auxiliary message. You have the intentional message, you have an unintentional message, and then you have what's communicated through how the content gets across. So this is the kind of message that the medium is going to communicate to your audience. The parts of any message are also going to be very, very similar. And some of these might be implicit in the case of visual communication. Some of them might be explicit in the case of written communication. But all messages have some kind of attention statement, how the message captivates the audience. Messages also have an introduction, so they have an establishment of the topic or the goal. They have a discussion section, which is the body of the message, how you present and organize the message. They have a conclusion, which is how you leave your audience with closure. And then you have a residual message, which is what your audience actually remembers from the communication. So to begin with, let's talk about written communication. And there are really two things that you want to think about as far as your strategies for becoming a good writer. And that is, one, to write, and two, to read. You really have it with writing skill. There's no such thing as a natural born writer. People practice writing, and that's why they're good at it. Another reason why they're good at writing is because they read. So understanding the kinds of business documents that you're going to be writing and reading them to see, okay, this is an example of a good memo, or this is an example of a good email communication. In general, good business writing has a few things about it that are specific to business writing. Number one, it follows rules. And these rules can be audience rules, reader expectations, or they can be industry standards that have been set. And you as a good business communicator need to understand when you are allowed to be creative in the writing that you choose to do and when you need to be more conservative. And this has a lot to do with formality or the context in which you're writing. You can likely be more creative in a marketing message versus internal memo to your boss. Business writing is also easy to read. Reader understanding is a definitive factor in good business writing. This doesn't mean that it's dumbed down, but it does explain complex ideas in a way that most readers can understand. This also means you choose dynamic and specific verbs so that the movement of a message is clear to a reader. It attracts the reader. Always ask, is someone going to want to read this? What's in it for them? You want to make this kind of takeaway very clear to them. Also, you need to think about how you are competing with other modes. So how is your writing, your written communication competing with something that's visual and that people are naturally going to be more directed towards? Good business writing always meets readers' expectations. So again, as always, you have to think about who your audience is and what experiences or perceptions they bring to the table with them. You would need to clearly understand also what the writing assignment entails. And I don't mean writing assignment like the formal proposal writing assignment. I mean, when you're asked to send an email to somebody, they're going to be expecting a specific kind of writing or specific aspect of that writing. They're going to have ideas about the conventions of that specific writing style or writing situation. Always clear and concise writing is good business writing. And really what this comes down to is fidelity. And what fidelity means is accurate communication. All intended information is sent without any kind of message breakdown or interpretation breakdown or interference. The fidelity of a radio station, for example, is the clarity of that radio station. There's not any kind of static. So thinking about business writing as an issue of fidelity, about not creating any kind of static, about eliminating errors, both production of errors and also the audience's response to certain things, is very important. And then good business writing is efficient and effective. Again, this boils down to time and time crunch. How do we do the most with the increasingly small amount of time that we and our audiences have? One way to accomplish this is to read examples so you can cut down on the amount of revision that you have to do, which takes time. And always keep your goals in mind as you're moving forward. If you know that you need to get to a certain place, you're going to be directed to that specific moment of writing. So there are always rhetorical elements at play, even whenever you're doing business writing as opposed to just regular, academic writing. And even with business writing, logos, ethos, and pathos comes into play. Many of you will probably recognize this already. You may have experienced this in English 101, but I just want to go over the rhetorical triangle, just so you have this here. So you can use these cognate strategies, which are ways of carrying out logos or ethos or pathos to better your business writing. So logos strategies have to do with clarity, of clear understanding of your goal, conciseness of key points, and arrangement. So the order or the placement of information is an issue of logos and logic. Ethos is about your credibility, your character, the trust that your audience has in you. It's about expectations, both the audience's expectations and industry norms or anticipated outcomes of a specific situation. And also reference, so being able to create frames of reference that your audience has access to. Pathos is about engagement and relationships in a lot of ways. So you're going to be engaging pathos-driven arguments anytime you meet with a client and you are expressing thanks for them, showing up, or you're trying to convince them to buy something based on their relationship to, the topic or the product. Your strategies here are your tone, your expression, the emphasis that you place on certain things based on the attention that the audience wants to pay to certain things, and the engagement that you have with that person, so the relationship that you're building with a client. Style in business writing is often a tricky thing because there are a lot of moments when you use more informal style, but there are also places where you need to understand the boundary of formality. So I want to break down just some aspects of style that happen in business writing. You have colloquial style, casual style, formal style. Colloquial style is almost exclusively internal communications, though it can be used for marketing, like regional products. Often, like, you'll use colloquialisms in kind of folksy marketing strategies. It's often common in digital writing, and it makes use of colorful phrases or slang. And those are some examples there: Coke, pop, fix and two. Casual writing is, again, often internal communications. The emphasis here is on the interaction itself as opposed to a power dynamic or a protocol. So casual interactions are fine between coworkers, but if you're talking to a boss who has power over you, there's a different kind of formality you want to use with that person. Formal, this is often external communications. It's characterized by sophisticated vocabulary and syntax, and you establish a certain kind of appearance or adherence to protocol. You establish hierarchy in formal communication. And all of this really depends on the purpose of your writing, the audience that you're speaking to, and the channel, so the medium that you're speaking through. Legality is a really important thing to think about in terms of written communication, because what you write is permanent, and it is, again, not something that just represents you, but it represents your company. There are industry standards around plagiarism, and they have legal policies. Digital technology and online media have also changed how we handle issues of defamation, false statements, and damages for libel. So your opinions, as they show up online, are still permanent. They leave a trace, and these are also kind of written statements that can have consequences. So I want you guys to be thinking about that. And you're also going to be thinking about this with a discussion in the coming weeks about social media policy and the ways that you represent yourself as an employee. So moving on to oral communication. There's not actually a lot of difference between written and oral communication, other than your speaking. You're speaking versus you're using a pen. Both do include a rhetorical situation. There's a context involved. You can have interference, and there's verbal, so language-based aspects of the communication, but there's also nonverbal. So style in writing is a kind of nonverbal aspect, but delivery, the way you hold yourself, the way you dress, is a nonverbal aspect of oral communication. The two big ones is that the one aspect of these two different styles of communication is that one is asynchronous, meaning I send you a message, you may not read it immediately, versus synchronous. As soon as I say something, you know you have received that message. So some effective strategies for thinking about that synchronicity of communication. Make sure you define your terms. So be aware of any words that you use that can be unfamiliar to your audience. Use substitutes, use easily understood words or phrases, and always give examples of terms that you're using. You want to choose precise words, so avoid using vague or abstract descriptors. Make sure you consider your audience, so use the context clues that are around them at that given moment. Make sure you're giving them what's called internal summaries, so frequently let them know what they've already heard and then also what is about to come in the presentation. You want to follow any jargon terms you use with common references. And remember that even though it may feel like a one-way communication where you're presenting something, that even a business presentation is a conversation. So being able to pay attention to your audience's reactions to certain things that you say. You can see when someone is confused by what you say, and you can respond to that as if you were having a conversation. Make sure you take control of your tone. So one way you can think about this is as you practice, characterize your tone. When you listen to yourself, record yourself practicing, and you listen, and you hear, oh, I sound really stuffy, or I sound really sophisticated. Being able to put a word to your tone is actually a really important kind of reflective practice. Again, practice out loud first in front of others. Watch other presentations that have been described with terms associated with your desired term. So if you're trying to be funny, maybe look for a White House press secretary, what is the press dinner where the comedians, stand up, and it's a professional environment, but they're having a lighter tone in their oral communication. Get feedback on your oral communication. Ask someone to sit while you speak at them, and have them give you feedback for that. Check for understanding. It's okay in the middle of your presentation, especially if you have a small group in front of you, to ask clarifying questions throughout your presentation. Does everyone understand? Are we on the same page? That kind of thing. And again, pay attention to body language and kind of facial cues of people not understanding or not believing you. You can make up for a lot of kind of gaps in knowledge by paying attention to those things. And be results oriented. So begin with the end in mind. If you know where you're going, again, you can get to that place in a lot quicker way. And also know when to turn to revision and to turn away from revision. So revision as in like yourself working on something, and then when to turn to peer review, so someone else looking at something, and also when to turn away from peer review. There is a place at which peer review is no longer helpful, that you may even get too much feedback from peers, and you want to know when to kind of cut that off and understand when the job is done. So another thing that is really important thinking about speech and oral communication is how your body is in relation to your speech. So one of the things you can do is think about the stage as, or your speech as a stage in which you block out your places. So, if you have 3 points in your speech, you can say, I'm going to be on the left side of the stage at point 1. When I move to point 2, I'm going to move to this right side of the stage, and I'm going to come back to middle at my final point. That is also a memory practice that you can use, so that when you move to point 2 on the stage, you know that you should be moving to point 2 in your speech. There's also gestures with your hands that are really important to kind of gear your audience towards your nonverbal communication. So there's anticipation gestures, which is kind of a raising of the hand, and this is you ramping up an argument. Implementation might be bringing your hands back to the middle of your body, where you're kind of pointing and you're making sure your point is made. Perhaps you're bringing your hands down over one another so that you look like you're making a point. And then there's relaxation gestures, which bring your hands below your waist, and they help indicate that your point is kind of ramping down, that you've made your point and now you're done. And then also eye contact is a kind of movement. A good way to think about eye contact is maintaining eye contact for no more than 3 seconds, but moving from the left side of the audience to the center, to the right side of the audience, and back to center. So thinking of your eye movement in quadrants can help you keep that equitable. Looking just at the right side of the room isn't going to be as effective as being able to scan across. So a note about nonverbal communication: this is how your body is moving during your speech. Even though it often is more visible in oral communication, it happens in all modes of communication. It can add to, even replace verbal communication at times. It's fluid, it's continuous, it's incredibly fast. It's usually body-centric. It's often more convincing than what you're actually saying. It's irreversible. It's universal. It can be intentional, but it can also be unintentional. It can be confusing for people. You can be saying one thing with your hands and a completely different thing with your words. And it's also contextual. So it's based on the space that you're actually in. So some examples of nonverbal strategies. Gesture in general is a thing that you do with your hands or your body to add to, or at times even replace certain concepts. An emblem is actually a replacement for a word. So an example of an emblem is making the okay sign instead of saying okay. So you're replacing an actual response, a full response, with just a gesture. A regulator is something that kind of helps you. It stops communication, or it affects communication between two people. So one example of a regulator is holding your hand up to tell you, the person you're speaking to, that you no longer want to speak. A display of affect, which is a display of emotion, is another nonverbal strategy. And then adapters, you can have a self-adapter, which might be, for example, playing with your hair. It's something to kind of ease something within yourself. And then an object adapter, so you may be using an object in a way that it's not intended to. So moving on to visual communication. I'm really just going to go down a list of possible visuals that you might use and what they are meant to do. And I'll show you some examples of these as we go along. So a photograph a video clip or a video still is meant to show a person, event, or work of art, something along the lines of that. It's meant to capture an image. So you see here the NC State Makerspace has one of these photographs on their website to show that this is what happens in that space. A flowchart or a comparison chart is going to show the visual relationship between many things. And so you can see here, is your data safe online? And you go through this whole chart, yes, no. And it brings you to some new understanding of this information. This can also show a process. Often flowcharts show a process. A bar chart is going to show the amount of one or more variables at different stages or different things. So this specific bar chart shows percentages of features that are hated versus loved. A pie chart is going to show the percentages of the whole occupied by various segments. A line graph is going to show change across time. And then an actual object is going to show an audience an item that's crucial to the discussion. So one of the mainstays of a business presentation that Apple does every time they release a new iPhone is that they actually have the Macintosh or the Apple with them. This has been done since 1984. Steve Jobs released the Macintosh. Apple and the object was there, and that had a very important effect on the audience, as opposed to just showing it on a screen or a poster board. So some general strategies for emphasis for across all or most of these modes are the following. You can use visual communication in just about any of these: written document, oral presentation, and then of course visual presentation. The visual components of anything are going to support the document that you have. It's going to demonstrate certain concepts to different kinds of learners, and it's going to demonstrate concepts to other cultures as well. You also always want to be using signposts. These alert the audience to a change in topic, a tangential explanation, example, or conclusion. And in written language, they're marked by transition words. Also in oral communication, they're marked by certain turns of phrases, like on the one hand, on the other. And then in visual communication, there's also ways that a visual aid can kind of indicate transition. So for example, a flow chart has very clear signposts of the direction in which the flow is supposed to go. Other emphasis strategies: repetition. You can have direct repetition, which is repeating words or phrases. You can also have indirect, so you can find alternative ways to make the same point over and over again. And then another great strategy for emphasis is internal summaries and foreshadowing. This is, again, helping the audience keep track of where they are in the message. This is what we've just done. Here's what we're going to do. And that's it for the modes of communication, general strategies